On September 25, 1066, the Viking Age symbolically came to an end at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, close to York, England. The army of Norwegian King HARALD HARDRADA had lost a battle to the forces of English King Harold II. HARDRADA would perish during the decisive battle, in which his army was nearly annihilated. The Battle of Stamford Bridge stands as a fitting epilogue to the Viking Age. HARALD HARDRADA tried to follow in the footsteps of Sven Forkbeard and Canute the Great, who had conquered England a half-century earlier, but he fell in what would be the last major Viking battle on Western European soil. Vikings stopped attacking Western Europe in the late 11th century for two main reasons. First, vastly improved defensive measures had made it more difficult and risky for the Vikings to raid and plunder, as they had done for centuries. After almost 3 centuries of frequent Viking attacks, the kingdoms of the British Isles and the European continent had figured out how to defend themselves. In the 11th century, each king made sure that he had a reliable military apparatus and regular income from taxes, fines, and other fees, as well as feudal services in kind. All of these aspects of medieval government had been enhanced at least partially in response to Viking attacks. Western kingdoms managed to build up fortified defenses against all kinds of threats, notably these Viking raids, meaning that any potential Scandinavian fighters thought twice about attacking. The risks and the costs had become too great. The Vikings had shrewdly taken advantage of the weak defenses of most European states in the 9th and 10th centuries. However, they could no longer do this towards the end of the 11th century. Next, kings at home in Scandinavia no longer tolerated freebooting Vikings, preferring to redirect the aggressive energies of their countrymen elsewhere, particularly towards the east. Meanwhile, in Scandinavia, other developments prevented Viking expeditions from ever setting sail. Around the year 1000, 3 Scandinavian kingdoms were created where a king ruled each of them. A king could ill afford competing chieftains. He needed to control violence in his kingdoms, making sure that no competitor was able to gather so much strength that he could contest the power of the king. It would take centuries before any really strong governments existed in Scandinavia, but we may observe the beginnings of the process in the late Viking Age, when King Harald Bluetooth, for example, constructed a network of military camps throughout Denmark. Those camps did not help him hold on to his power when his son Sven rebelled a few years later, but Harald laid the foundations for keeping the regions of Denmark assembled under one ruler. Over the following centuries, that ruler would come from Harald's family, illustrating that royal blood had become more important than military prowess in gaining power. Despite all of this, the Scandinavians did not become peaceful or stop fighting, raiding, and plundering. They simply directed their energies elsewhere, and they organized such enterprises in new ways. The Scandinavian kings themselves arranged raids, especially against the peoples living along the southern and eastern coast of the Baltic Sea. In the centuries after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the kings of Sweden and Denmark attacked Finland, Estonia, Russia, and the Slavic peoples in what today is northeastern Germany. When Danish King Valdemar II invaded Estonia in 1219, Pope Honorius III supported the attack against the pagans of the eastern Baltic by awarding crusading privileges to Valdemar and his warriors. In the early 1260s, King Haakon IV of Norway forced the inhabitants of Greenland and Iceland to recognize him as their ruler, to whom they owed fees and taxes. These changes in warfare produced plunder and booty for Scandinavian kings, who at the same time strove to expand the geographical extent of their kingdoms. Scandinavian leaders continued to attack and eventually conquer territory, but just no longer in Western Europe. Scandinavian kings learned to behave more like Charlemagne and less like marauders and Vikings. A new era truly arrived when the Vikings' unique moment in history had run its course, and Scandinavians instead opted to join Europe. They embraced Christianity and other ideologies and adopted European artistic ideals, military tactics, and trading patterns. When Scandinavians became the subjects of kings and the servants of the universal church, they were no longer Vikings. The age of the Vikings had come to a close.